Hello, I'm Portia Young. Next on 1036, we'll discuss the issue of trauma and youth incarceration. Plus, rice. You may be serving it for Thanksgiving. Find out how it might soon become a cash crop in Wisconsin. And the MSO's music director shares how growing up in East Germany has impacted his American dream. Incarceration of youth offenders is considered necessary for public protection, but research shows it's not always effective in terms of cost or outcome. Earlier this year, Milwaukee Journal Sentinel reporter James Causey wrote about childhood trauma and youth incarceration in his series Life Correction, the Marlin Dixon story. That led to a Listen MKE discussion this past summer featuring James, Marlin, and investigative reporter Tessa Duvall, who did some work on this topic for the Florida Times-Union. James Causey and Marlin Dixon join me now to talk about this topic, showcased in a forum that will air next week here on Milwaukee PBS. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Well, James, I'm going to first start with you. What prompted these reports that led to that forum held this summer? And explain briefly how you were able to get Marlin involved.
Well, yeah, so I got contacted by a woman by the name of Vicky Conti, who had got in contact with Marlin roughly 2 years before he was released, and she told me about this story that she thought I would be interested in, and it has so many different elements to it. It was an element of youth being sort of out of control, the death of a man on the city's northwest side, but also how we incarcerate our youth for long periods of time and then leave them on extended supervision for like forever. And I just felt that we needed to do something about that, and I was able to contact Marlin. I sent him a message or a letter, and he read it in jail, and he got back in contact with me, and we developed a correspondence that way.
Okay, so Marlin, how did you get involved, and first, what led to your incarceration?
What led to my incarceration was, I lived, 20th and Brown, and growing up in the, ghetto, and I was there with 17 other individuals that was involved, and things spur out of control that night, and as a result of that, I end up getting 18 years and 22 years extended supervision, and what led to them events was kids, young kids like myself out there, no direction. Parents, either you have one parent or you have none. Rarely did I see both parents in the house with none of my friends. And so, when your mom work and, your dad dead or he in prison, you bound to get off into the streets. And that's what ended up happening to me, unfortunately, as a young teenager, and that led to me being convicted of first-degree reckless homicide.
So why did you get involved in the forum and partnering with James?
My friend Vicky Conti, that he speaks of, that he knows about, she was she reached out to me, and I used to talk to her all the time about my experience, because she was very curious to know what happened to me over the years while I was in prison. She used to kind of speak to me as if I was still a kid, because when she finally, we met each other, I was an adult. So she knew me as a young kid, young youth going in. So I ended up telling her my experiences, and I exchanged some stories and stuff with her. And then she was like, "Do you ever think about speaking out about these things?" And I told her that absolutely. And then she, got me in contact with James, and from there, we got the ball rolling to talk about it.
How old were you?
14.
14.
Yeah.
All right. So James, in your reporting, do you think we are even doing enough to address the, I think, epidemic of childhood trauma?
No.
Children in crisis.
No, we're not doing that. We're not doing nearly enough. We're not doing enough to address childhood trauma, adult trauma, any kind of trauma. It's funny because what happened to Marlin back in 2002, what he was involved in, trauma wasn't even talked about. nobody mentioned trauma or anything like that. When it was mentioned, it was usually directed towards people coming out of the military, soldiers who was in combat and things like that. But nobody talked about the trauma that youth like Marlin would see every day, seeing shootings, hearing sirens all the time, and violence, and living in a violent conditions. And that has an impact on you. And Marlon didn't even tell you that he was an angry young man at the time, and it led to some of the decisions that he made. But we need to address it more, and we're not doing nearly enough to address it.
Well, we're not perhaps not doing enough, like you say, but there are some things that are moving the needle. What would you say is working right now? What programs are working?
Well, Charlene Moore and Reggie Moore, who are well known in Milwaukee, they started a program called Urban Underground, which not only, the way it was described to me, it doesn't just take youth and like give them basketball or something like that to do. What it does is it builds up their self-esteem and teaches them who they are. And we need more programs like that. Instead of trying to hide kids and things like that because we don't want to understand them, we need to build up their self-esteem and teach them how to be leaders. And those type of programs work. Unfortunately, we don't have enough of those kind of programs or the funding to put behind them, or so they say.
Priorities, right?
Yes.
So Marlin, you've made this remarkable transition. What's been, I guess, what's the thing that you think has been the most successful on your journey? And what are some things where you maybe would change do differently?
Well, I guess the success so far is that, I'm not incarcerated, because the thing is that, I'm 3 times more likely to, go back for anything, any big thing, little thing, I'm liable to go back for. But I've been out 2 years now, and that's a success in its own. But it's been hard. It hasn't been easy because of the type of scrutiny that I'm under due to my extended supervision rules. They have it to where, I have to not only be responsible for myself, but I got to be responsible for others. So I have to watch out who may have a gun, who may be a felon, who may be a gang member, because if I'm associated with them at any moment of time, that's a violation to my rules, and I could be sent back to prison just off that alone.
So James, the last question. What has the response been for city officials and from other community advocates to the reporting that you've been doing?
Well, I wish the response would have been better. I'm still a little disappointed in that because Marlin is like one of thousands of people on this long extended supervision list, and I don't see the legislator or legislative branch doing anything to change that. I don't really see any politicians really standing up and pushing for that. And this needs to come on a bipartisan type deal where the Dems and the Republicans need to agree that we have to get people on the pathway to success. And the way you do that is not leave a person on extended supervision for like 22 years.
Thank you, James, for your reporting. And Marlin Dixon, thank you so much for sharing your story and for being here on 1036. There is so much more discussion on this issue in a special that will air on Milwaukee PBS. Listen MKE, Youth Incarceration Dilemma, November 21st at 9 p.m. here on Milwaukee PBS Channel 10. Listen MKE has been a partnership with the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel, WUWM Milwaukee's NPR, Milwaukee PBS, and the Milwaukee Public Library. A Marquette professor is looking to make rice Wisconsin's next big cash crop. But the rice farm is also a means of preserving life and culture. Producer Alexandria Mack takes us to the Mequon Nature Preserve.
There's an old saying that goes, if you give someone rice, they'll eat for the day. But if you teach someone to grow rice, they'll eat for life.
My day job is to do research and teaching.
Michael Schlappe is a Marquette professor of biological sciences, but when he's not teaching, he's growing rice.
part of my research was about is about rice. So I have a rice project. I'm a geneticist and a molecular biologist, and I try to understand the genetic pathways that lead some rice to be more cold tolerant than others.
Much of the rice in the U.S. is grown in warm, dry climate states like Arkansas, California, and Texas. But with growing droughts, the water needed for successful growth could become an issue in coming years.
Our prediction is most people predict that maybe in 10, maybe in 20 years, there won't be any more rice grown in Arkansas because there's simply no water. There's no groundwater, or no rice in California. But Wisconsin has plenty of water still, right? But the problem is cold, right? The cold spring. So I married those two things. In general, rice is a very cold, sensitive plant. But in doing so, I transferred some of the research in my lab to the outside at Marquette. I built some rooftop small patties, and I tested things that I learned in the inside to the outside to see if some of those plants that I screened that were cold tolerant inside were also cold tolerant outside. And by doing so, by planting early, I realized that some rice variety that I tested hundreds of variety, can grow in Wisconsin. You can plant them early, they survive the spring, they make a flower like just right now in August, and then they mature the grain and they can be harvested by October. So that window was necessary.
Redstone rice is Wisconsin's first commercial-scale rice crop. It just so happens it's locally grown, harvested, and packaged near the Milwaukee area, and it's a bigger job than one man in a field can do alone.
So then I partnered with Fondi. Fondi has the mission to give access to farmers that traditionally don't have access to land. And this partnership started in about 2014, I believe. And then in 2015, we moved here to this nature preserve. And then I had great access to build patties also through a grant that I received from Marquette University.
I feel like a lot of things, we're at our best when things are happening organically and we're listening to the community. And this is something that's happened very organically. Starting in the 80s, there was a refugee Hmong population coming, or even earlier than that, to the United States and settling in Milwaukee, and very talented farmers who started growing and looking for places to sell, and they started to sell at the Fondi Farmers Market, and slowly built up the capacity and to where they are now, where the Hmong community is. Like I said, our vendors are probably over 90% Hmong, or identify as Hmong or Hmong American.
Now, farming at the preserve reminds Belia of her childhood in Laos that set her up for a lifetime of tending to the fields. In countries around the world, rice farming proves to be more than just a cash crop, but a means of preserving life and culture.
There's obviously an economic component to it, but it's not solely economic. A big part is cultural. Many of the farmers, when we're talking out here, will tell me how, one of the reasons they farm is to show their kids what it was like for them growing up, or to be able to grow the food and bring it home and prepare traditional meals and share with their kids and now their grandkids.
For Michael, it's about using Wisconsin's natural resources to give rice a new permanent home.
My big vision, maybe it's a kind of a crazy vision, is that maybe one of those days, the next decade or 2 decades, rice cultivation can be more predominant in Wisconsin in an area where we have no issues with water. Because water is really necessary for high yield in rice. You can grow rice without flooding, but the yield, in my experience, it's quite reduced, less than 50% of what you get with water. So that's, I hope that maybe catches on, and with the help of Hmong farmers and maybe others, that rice will become, just like soybean or corn, a crop that can be grown in Wisconsin.
The Milwaukee Symphony Orchestra recently began its second full season in the Bradley Symphony Center. Music director Ken David Mazur tells us he's living out his American dream inside the MSO's concert hall. The maestro was gracious enough to invite the 1036 crew into his home to talk about that dream and his early life in East Germany.
American Dream was something that was so distant but always colored with a certain sweetness. I'm Ken David Mazur, music director of the Milwaukee Symphony Orchestra. I grew up in the town of Leipzig in Germany, in the state of Saxony. It was the second largest city after East Berlin in East Germany. I was born in 1977, 12 years before the reunification. My mother is a Japanese musician, singer. She met my father, who is a conductor and who at the time was music director, or the Kapellmeister, as we call it, of the Gewandhaus, one of the really great traditional orchestras in Germany. And they met in Rio de Janeiro. For the most part, I really felt that I was this German kid. And then occasionally, of course, people would point out that perhaps I didn't look as German as they did, being half Japanese, and was sometimes called things. But I grew up otherwise just like a German boy who loved everything that all of my friends loved. I was my mother's only child, and so I was constantly trying to find friends, knocking on people's doors, even though I didn't know who lived there. I just thought maybe there's somebody there to play with. And it was a time when you could do that. The American dream seemed something that everything, regardless what it is, must be much better. Life is better, music is better, food is better, colors are brighter. And it was after the reunification, of course, that we saw more of what is the idea of the West, and watching TV shows that would come over, such as a boy, I think one of the first things I remember seeing on TV was the sitcom Alf. And yeah, it was one of my favorite things to watch as a boy. We thought about imagery from America, and of course when guests came from America to our home and brought, candy and gifts and things that looked completely different. I think that what we know from what came from America in terms of also jazz and things that I think my father would sometimes say, here's a recording or an LP of things like Duke Ellington. I came to the United States, we came to New York when I was 13 years old. And I entered school there in New York, the German School of New York. And it was difficult for me because I remember that when my father got the appointment to be music director of the New York Philharmonic, it was not an easy decision. But when the decision was made, of course, he and my mother wanted to introduce me in a way that would ease me perhaps into this city and into the life that was so different from what I had known. And so as a young teenage boy, they brought me to New York City to live for a couple of weeks across from Lincoln Center in one of those hotels. And I remember, because of jet lag, getting out of bed in the middle of the night, and it was on Broadway, and of course the street was so busy and noisy. And the next day I said, I'm not coming here. I think my mother led this after my reaction to not stay in the city, but to move just 30 minutes north of the city, where you have more quiet, there's more peace, more nature. That helped me ease into understanding that American life is more than just the hustle and bustle of New York City.
Do you have dual citizenship?
No, but I'd like to. I'm a German citizen with a green card. And because I'm now the only non-American citizen in my family, I've made plans to become a U.S. citizen. For me, the American dream was always something that was I think an idea, a dream, and rooted in imagination, in sort of also a little bit of fantasy of what are perhaps your own hopes, even in music, just feeling free to try anything without being judged. And during our daily lives, we are concerned with things, we are worried about things, but when we are all in the concert hall together, at least for those 2 hours, we know that we will have peace. And I'm realizing that this is the same for the country, really, that is the home of the American dream. That with the more freedom you're given, the more responsibility and the more challenges also you have with it. And this is why it's become clear to me that actually our idea to keep up this imagination of what the American dream is about bringing the people together on a personal level, in your neighborhood, in the communities that we are connected with, family, and especially after all the recent events that we had to face, not taking things for granted, especially the things that are closest to you. I think I've questioned the American dream about, is it really true that we can use the privilege that we've been given about freedom of speech and freedom of thought and of creativity in the right way without hurting one another? And I think seeing that it's sometimes gone to a much more uncivilized form, I think that every time that happens and that we witness that and that I see that, the American dream idea gets shattered and gets damaged in a sense. And that's when I feel it's much more important to understand that we on the inside, I think with a hope of coming together, a level of joy, positivity, and with this feeling that we are all actually blessed to be given this life and blessed to be given family and loved ones and experience that and be able to share that with others, that we are responsible for that.
of the American dream is, you know, life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. What makes you happy?
I think simple things. Having the liberty to create, to do programming that brings voice to people who didn't have a voice perhaps, or not enough of a voice, to find out about the huge range of people and of cultures, to be able to do that through art and through music, and much of that has really started here in the United States. I am living the American dream. I'm living a dream. I feel that I'm gifted with extraordinary performances, rehearsals, moments of music in the home, with extraordinary musicians, especially here with the Milwaukee Symphony Orchestra, in an extraordinary new concert hall, exploring some of the great music that has been written and that has not yet been written, and that I can be part of being in the process of being created. And that is absolutely a dream come true. And I'm very grateful that I can do it here in Milwaukee.
You heard Ken David's American dream. His wife, pianist Melinda Lee Mazur, shares her dream with us as well. For that story, please go to milwaukeepbs.org/American Dreams. We would also like to thank the Mazur family and the MSO for the additional photographs seen in their stories. That'll do it for this edition of 1036. Remember, check us out on social media and on our YouTube channel. November is one of the many times to be grateful as Thanksgiving approaches. And it's another time to remember and thank all of our military veterans. We leave you with a view from above Wood National Cemetery in Milwaukee, where thousands of our veterans are now at rest.